Hi again. John Stott, in his book on Acts, The Spirit, the Church, and the World, Paul has just finished his ministry in Corinth, at least his ministry in the flesh in Corinth, after 18 months. And now Paul is in transit and will end up in Ephesus. Luke now follows Paul from Corinth to Ephesus, Caesarea, Jerusalem, Antioch, and back through Galatia to Ephesus again. His narrative is very condensed, either because his information was limited, he was himself still in Philippi, or because his purpose was to get Paul from Achaia to Asia, where he had previously been forbidden by the Spirit to preach, according to Acts 16, verse 6. From his 2 years in Corinth to his 3 years in Ephesus, without dwelling on his intervening months of travel. Subhead: Paul visits Ephesus, Jerusalem, and Antioch. That's chapter 18 of Acts, verses 18 to 23. Sometime after Gallio's refusal to take cognizance of the Jewish charge against the apostle, Paul left the brothers and sailed for Syria, presumably intending to report back to the church of Syria and Antioch, which had sent him out, according to chapter 13, and was accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila, who may well have financed his trip. Luke now adds the interesting detail that before he sailed, he had his hair cut off at Caesarea, Corinth's eastern port, because of a vow he had taken, according to verse 18. Commentators have been perplexed regarding who made this vow, what it was, when it was taken, and why. As for the person concerned, although the grammar permits it to be Aquila, the context requires that it was Paul. The reference to his hair makes it almost certain that it was a Nazarite vow, which involved abstinence from drinking wine and from cutting one's hair for a period, at the end of which the hair was cut out, first cut and then burned, along with other sacrifices, as a symbol of self-offering to God. If the vow was completed away from Jerusalem, the hair could still be brought there to be burned. Such vows were made either in thankfulness for past blessings, such as Paul's safekeeping in Corinth, or as part of a petition for future blessing, such as safekeeping on Paul's impending journey. Once Paul had been liberated from the attempt to be justified by the law, his conscience was free to take part in practices which, being ceremonial or cultural, belonged to the matters indifferent. Perhaps on this occasion, in order to conciliate the Jewish Christian leaders he was going to see in Jerusalem, relating to his subsequent visit. They arrived at Ephesus, where Paul left Priscilla and Aquila. He himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews, according to verse 19. His mission was so much more acceptable to the Jews in Ephesus than in Corinth. Did this have anything to do with his shaven head? This was more acceptable to the Jews in Ephesus, he says, than in Corinth, that they wanted him to stay, but when they asked him to spend more time with them, he declined, verse 20 says, adding, according to the Western text, I must at all costs keep the coming festival in Jerusalem, which Ramsay declared may be confidently understood as the Passover. Whatever the reason for Paul's haste, as he left, he promised to return, saying, I will come back if it is God's will. Then he set sail from Ephesus. When he landed at Caesarea, Palestine's chief port, he went up and greeted the church and then went down to Antioch, according to verse 22. The church which he greeted on disembarkation was almost certainly not that of Caesarea, but of Jerusalem, about 65 miles inland. For the terms going up and going down are used so frequently of the journey to and from Jerusalem as to establish this usage. After spending some time in Antioch, probably from the early summer of AD 52 to the early spring of 53, and having doubtless given its church a full account of his second missionary expedition, Paul set out from there on what proved to be his third and last. He will have gone first in a northerly direction, then west through the Cilician gates, over the Taurus range, and travel from place to place throughout the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples, according to verse 23. This must mean that he revisited the churches of Pisidian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, which he had established during his first missionary journey in chapters 13 to 14, and consolidated during his second missionary journey, according to 16 verse 6. This, of course, is setting Paul up for his longest stay in any one place, Ephesus, 3 years, in which his great mission was to establish the religion of God the Father of Jesus Christ, in opposition to the great cult of the time, especially in Ephesus, which was, of course, God the Mother. In the case of Ephesus, the goddess Artemis or Diana. So we'll put in a link to that part of the revelation of the divine names, the emphasis in both Paul and especially in John to the identification of the God of the Old Testament with one they call God the Father, or just the Father. Why was this so important in the face of goddess worship in the Mediterranean world?